The sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty frontier town of Rattlespur as crowds gathered around the wooden auction block, forming a tight circle around a single woman whose wrists were tied but whose posture remained defiantly upright. Her name was Alina Marrow, a trained healer whose hands had saved soldiers, ranchers, and children alike. Today, those same hands were bound like those of a criminal. The sheriff stood with a smug grin, announcing loudly that the woman had been arrested for practicing medicine without a license. Though everyone knew the real truth, the railroad barons wanted her captured because she had aided the injured miners who rebelled against their cruelty. She had become a threat, a symbol of hope for men the rich wanted to control. So they twisted the law, seized her, and now she stood to be sold for labor compensation, as they called it. But Alina refused to lower her gaze. Her amber eyes burned with fury as bidders shouted numbers like she was livestock. Men with dirty hats and greed in their voices, each one imagining how they could exploit her medical knowledge for profit. Then, through the shouts, a different voice cut through the air deep.com, and sharp as a knife. A tall cowboy in a black hat stepped into the sunlight, dust swirling around his boots, his expression unreadable. His name was Cade Holt, a rancher known for riding alone, his past wrapped in rumor and shadow. He raised his hand only once, but the amount he called silenced the entire crowd. The sheriff blinked, startled, then slammed the gavel. Sold. The murmurs grew instantly. Why would Cade Holt pay so much for a healer? Why would a man who lives so far from town need someone like her? Alina stared at him, expecting chains, orders, or the cold commands she was used to from men who thought they owned her fate. Instead, Cade stepped closer, cutting her ropes with a swift motion of his knife. She recoiled in confusion, rubbing her wrists as he spoke low enough only she could hear. No one owns you. Not now, not ever. You're free. The words struck her harder than the ropes had. She shook her head, stunned. You paid for me, she whispered. That's your money gone. Cade tucked his knife away. I was buying your freedom, not you. The sheriff stormed over, furious, insisting the purchase required her to be delivered to Cade's property. But the cowboy merely shrugged. She's free to do what she wants. That's my right as the buyer. Grumbling, powerless to argue, the sheriff stepped back. Alina looked around at the hostile eyes, watching her, some angry she'd been freed, others disappointed they couldn't claim her for themselves. Fear flickered within her. Freedom in a place like Rattlespur was often more dangerous than captivity. Cade seemed to sense her hesitation. My ranch is a day's ride east, he said quietly. You can come rest there until you decide where to go next. Or you can walk the other way. I won't stop you. Alina studied him. There were no lies in his eyes, no hidden hunger, only sincerity, a rare quality in a lawless land. So she took a breath and nodded, choosing the direction of possibility over the path of danger. They rode together through wide open fields where the wind swept through tall grass like waves of gold. Cade didn't question her past, and Alina didn't ask about his. Silence became their companion until dusk swallowed the sky. When they reached Cade's ranch, a surprisingly peaceful stretch of land, surrounded by wildflowers and whispering pines, Alina felt a strange warmth settle in her chest. The place felt safe, untouched by the corruption she had known. Cade showed her a small cabin with a bed, water, and clean clothing. Stay as long as you need, he said. You've got the whole world ahead of you now, Miss Merrill. She watched him walk away, wondering why a man who lived alone, who carried grief in the set of his shoulders, would risk so much for a stranger. But she didn't have time to ask, because trouble was already riding their way. Back in town, the railroad barons had realized that Alina's freedom meant the miners she healed might rise again, and powerful men didn't like loose ends. They sent riders to retrieve what they believed belonged to them. Alina, sitting by the cabin window under the moonlight, felt a shiver of dread when she saw the flicker of torchlight on the horizon. Freedom, she realized, always came with a price, and someone out there was ready to make Cade pay. It thought. The distant glow of torches grew brighter as Alina stood by the window, her heartbeat thundering in her chest like approaching hooves. She hurried outside, the night air cold against her skin, and found Cade saddling his horse with calm determination, though tension rippled beneath the surface of his silence. They're coming for me, she said, breathless. I never meant to draw danger to your home. Cade shook his head, fastening the saddle strap. Danger's been riding these lands long before you came along. You didn't bring it too, just made it show its face. His voice held no blame, only a steady resolve that made her chest tighten with something unfamiliar, something warm. She stepped closer. Let me talk to them. If they want me, He cut her off with a sharp, protective glare. You're not going anywhere with them. They don't want a healer. They want control. They'll use you until you break, and I won't let that happen. Alina stared at him, shaken by the fierceness in his words. She had been fighting alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like for someone to choose her side, without expecting anything in return. Cade mounted his horse and extended a hand to her. Come on. We're not waiting for them to surround the ranch. She climbed up behind him, gripping his vest as they rode into the dark wilderness, the wind tearing past them as the first shouts echoed from behind. The pursuers split into groups, trying to flank them, but Cade knew the land better than any map. He led them through narrow canyons, across shallow rivers, and between towering rock formations where echoes confused their trackers. Hours passed in breathless escape until the torches behind them flickered and vanished. They finally dismounted in a hidden ravine, lit only by moonlight reflecting off the pale stone walls. Cade handed Alina a canteen. "You all right?" She nodded, though exhaustion tugged at her limbs. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You barely know me." Cade looked at her long enough that she felt the weight of unspoken truths. "Because someone once saved me the way I saved you," he said, "and I couldn't help them when they needed me most. I won't make that mistake twice." His voice cracked just barely but enough for Alina to sense he carried a wound deeper than any bullet could inflict. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You didn't fail them," she said quietly, though she didn't know the full story. "You're not failing me." The moment hung between them, fragile and pure, until the thunder of new hooves shattered the silence. The railroad men had found them again, this time armed and ready for a fight. Cade pushed Alina behind a rock formation and drew his revolver with practiced ease. "Stay down," he ordered. But Alina refused to be helpless again. She grabbed a fallen branch and crouched low, determined to defend herself if it came to it. The gunfight erupted like lightning-sharp flashes, the smell of gunpowder filling the air. Cade moved with lethal precision, taking cover and firing only when necessary. But there were too many of them. A bullet grazed his shoulder, making him stumble. Alina sprang from hiding, rushing to him despite his shout for her to stay back. She pressed her hand to his wound, stopping the bleeding just long enough for him to continue fighting. "You're supposed to be running," he yelled. "Not anymore." She fired back. "I'm done running." Her voice rang across the ravine, echoing off the stone. Empowered, she grabbed Cade's fallen rifle and, though her hands trembled, fired a warning shot that startled the riders long enough for Cade to take control again. The tide shifted. One by one, the attackers retreated, realizing the fight wasn't worth the cost. Finally, silence fell. Cade leaned heavily against the rocks, breathing hard. Alina tore fabric from her dress and bandaged his shoulder with quick, skilled motions. "You saved my life," he murmured, looking at her with a softness that made her heart stumble. "We saved each other," she whispered. When dawn finally broke, they returned to the ranch. Cade insisted she could stay, help heal the wounded in the region, build whatever kind of life she wanted. Alina looked around at the peaceful fields, the quiet cabin, the man who had risked everything to give her freedom, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. "I'll stay," she said, smiling faintly. "But not because I owe you, because this feels like home." Cade tipped his hat, a rare warm grin forming. "Then welcome home, Miss Marrow." As the camera would rise over the ranch, glowing in the morning light, Alina's voice would narrate softly. "Freedom is not given, it's chosen. And sometimes it's chosen by the people brave enough to stand with you." And as the screen fades, a final heartfelt line appears. If you loved this story of courage, sacrifice, and unexpected destiny, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more powerful tales to life.